Gerry Turner has been ratings gold as the Golden Bachelor, but a new report was published in The Hollywood Reporter that revealed a dark truth about Gerry that no one could have seen coming. Gerry has been hiding some twisted secrets and a scandalous past about literally every aspect of his life. There have been accusations that Gerry rigged his resume to get on the show. Although Gerry has complained that the screening process was intense, Gerry was seen as the grieving widower. One of his most famous quotes was, I haven't dated in 45 years, but that's allegedly not the real truth. The whole deal with Gerry was that he lost his wife, Toni, after 43 years of marriage. Toni passed away so unexpectedly, only a month after she and Gerry moved into their dream home on a lake in Hudson, Indiana. Gerry claimed that he hasn't dated since then, but inside sources have revealed another shocking side to the story. Allegedly, Gerry met a new woman at work. Yes, at work. Even though Gerry claimed to be retired, if you're wondering why Gerry, the retired restaurateur, was working somewhere, you need to hear this. The Hollywood Reporter dug up this scandalous story from people who knew Gerry on the job. These sources also knew the women who Gerry allegedly hooked up with, and Gerry and this mom did a lot more than just date. Gerry allegedly dated this woman for about a year. Then they lived together for just under 2 years. She's been described as an attractive younger woman. She was 14 years younger than Gerry, and she worked as an accountant at the same place Gerry worked. This crazy information wasn't just given to the media by inside sources. The woman also came forward to set the record straight. Although shockingly, she isn't using her real name. She asked to be called Carolyn. After Gerry's stint on The Bachelor, Carolyn wanted to tell her side of the story, but she wants to protect her privacy too. Carolyn's friends are backing her up, and Carolyn allegedly kept text messages from Gerry too. Thankfully, no source has ever come forward accusing Gerry of cheating on his late wife, although Gerry did meet Carolyn at work before Toni passed away. Carolyn has admitted that Gerry was a popular guy at work and everyone liked him. And when everyone at work heard about Toni's passing, Carolyn said that a big group from work went to the funeral home to pay their respect. Shockingly, just 1 month later, Carolyn alleged that she got a call from Gerry. He sounded lonely and needed help, and Carolyn agreed to help him sort out Toni's things. She said Gerry took her out for dinner as a friendly thank you gesture, but then Gerry started texting Carolyn, and Carolyn alleges that Gerry got hot and heavy quick. Yes, just 1 month after his wife passed. One of Gerry's texts to Carolyn said in part, "I got lucky when you first said you would go to dinner with me." Gerry also wrote, "How often does an old geezer get the beautiful girl?" Shockingly, Gerry was soon texting Carolyn messages like, "You are the right woman for me, no need to look further." While Carolyn never wanted to date a guy so soon after his wife passed, she continued seeing Gerry, but she made him wait a year after Toni's passing before she agreed to move into his lake house. Gerry even told Carolyn's elderly mother that they would get married, but shockingly, Gerry allegedly dumped Carolyn and he went on a date with other women. The U.S. Sun got wind of a tip from someone else who had intimate details about Gerry's dating life. This woman's name is Heather Lanning Adams, and Heather was a waitress at a bar right next door to Gerry's lake house in Indiana. A reporter from The Sun spoke to Heather at length. Heather's side of the story was shocking. She said Gerry often hung out at the bar, and Heather considered Gerry a friend. While they didn't date, Heather often saw Gerry come into the bar with other women, and this went on for 6 years. Heather told The Sun he was with a couple of women for a decent amount of time, but it just didn't work out. Shockingly, it's alleged that gossip was going around town that Gerry dumped Carolyn and then dumped her to go out with other women. And a close friend to Carolyn is now throwing shade at the Golden Bachelor. Carolyn's friend is Susan McCreary. Susan told a source that she couldn't believe what Gerry did to her friend. Susan described meeting Gerry when he began dating Carolyn in 2017. Gerry and Carolyn went with Susan and her husband to an Iowa Hockey's football game, and Susan remembered thinking to herself, "This guy's legit. This guy's a really good guy for her." Allegedly, that wasn't the real truth either. It sounds like Carolyn has a right to throw shade at Gerry, but she claims that she wasn't upset to see Gerry looking for love on television. Although Carolyn is accusing Gerry of using the same pickup lines on The Bachelor contestants that he used on her, the text messages that Carolyn kept from Gerry include pickup lines like, "I go to bed at night thinking of you and wake up in the morning thinking of you." That's almost the same thing that Gerry said to Bachelor contestant Leslie. And you know how Gerry was described as a retired restaurateur? That's far from the truth. Gerry's LinkedIn profile reveals another unbelievable side to the story. If his LinkedIn is accurate, and why wouldn't it be, the restaurant that Gerry allegedly owned was a drive-in hamburger joint. Gerry's restaurant was in Iowa, and it was a major quick fast food franchise. Gerry didn't just own that fast food restaurant. It's alleged that he started working there in high school, and he ended up buying the place and selling it in 1985. If that's the real truth, Gerry retired from the restaurant business pretty young, except Gerry didn't retire young. Sources with inside knowledge say that Gerry sold meat products after he got rid of the burger joint, and while the Golden Bachelor image made Gerry sound like he retired at age 55, previous employers who knew Gerry have set the record straight, including Carrie Gannon, who lives in Davenport, Iowa, and owns Gannon Pools. Gerry worked at Gannon Pools after age 55, and while hot tubs are frequently featured on Bachelor and Bachelor episodes, Gerry was that guy who installed hot tubs for customers of Gannon Pools. If that's about as far away from Gerry's Golden Bachelor image as you can imagine, it gets worse, because after Gerry installed hot tubs, he also worked as a maintenance man at a mental health facility in Iowa. That's the job where he met Carolyn. When Carolyn agreed to move into Gerry's lake house a year after they started dating, Carolyn alleges that she quickly discovered the real Gerry. He told her that they needed to share expenses, and Carolyn's share was almost $900 a month. Shockingly, Gerry allegedly told Carolyn that they would go Dutch on all restaurant meals, except on special occasions. But when they did eat out, Gerry made a crazy demand. He asked Carolyn to pay for her half in advance, and Gerry pocketed the money. Then, when the server brought the bill, Carolyn said Gerry made a big deal out of paying for it, like he was paying for everything. Carolyn also said that Gerry was an insane meat freak, but that wasn't the thing that ended their relationship. In October 2019, Gerry did something extremely cruel to Carolyn. She alleges that Gerry told her he was not taking her to his high school reunion just because Carolyn had put on 10 pounds. By January 2020, Gerry told Carolyn to move out. Then he left her alone to pack up all her things. While Carolyn was preparing to leave, she accidentally tripped down the stairs. She had to rush herself to the ER, and she required foot surgery. When Gerry came back to the lake house, he accused Carolyn of falling to get his sympathy. Even though Carolyn was legitimately injured and needed rest, Gerry told her she couldn't stay at the lake house, and she needed to use her walker to struggle through the cold and snow to find a hotel. The craziest thing about Gerry and the whole second chance at love thing was everyone who posted comments on social media about how Gerry brought a breath of fresh air and new life to the Bachelor franchise. Gerry portrayed himself as having real sensitivity and depth, but Carolyn remembers him differently. She recalled the last thing Gerry said to her. Allegedly, Gerry told her, "I really wish this would have worked out." It might seem like Gerry made it work on the Golden Bachelor, but if these shocking allegations are the truth, the real Gerry is nothing like he seemed.